أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the master of the day of judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts, the master of the day of judgment. And I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is His servant and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. The experience of the Prophet ﷺ living in revelation quite often is separated into two broader categories: a period that is Meccan and a period that is Medinese. The distinguishing event that separates these two categories is the hijrah from the city of Mecca to the city of Medina. So not necessarily geographically specific that these were verses that came down in these locales, but in these broader eras experientially of Islam. 13 years within a Meccan reality that was filled with outward difficulties, persecution, oppression, boycotts. And then 10 in a Medinese experience that established now a community that allowed for practice and identity rooted in practice to be done with a little bit more of a sense of security and ease. For many of us, when we experience our relationship with our faith, we come to a place where somebody might not be interrogating or testing, but we have the blessing of being in a community where pretty much every week about 2 to 5 people in this center take their shahada. May Allah grant them ease and make us a space that those who are seeking and searching for Him, they find here in His presence, in the presence of His love, His mercy. If those people came to ask you, well, what is Islam? And teach me a little bit about it, likely a lot of what it would be that we would offer to them are things that came to fruition not within the first 13 years of Meccan experience, but in the 10 years of Medinese revelation. This is how you pray 5 times a day. The ritual of prayer was given early on, but the mandate of 5 came closer to Medina. The fast that we fast in Ramadan, the mode of dress that we adopt as men and women under guidelines of hijab, rules and rituals, in large part, for the most part, came in that last 10 years of prophetic experience, not in the first 13. And where we reduce a lot of religion to those things, which are a part of it but not absolutely whole, it's important to think about, well, what were those people then doing in the first 13 years of Islam if they weren't fasting in Ramadan and they weren't engaged in 5 daily prayers from day one, they weren't performing pilgrimages? And that's an important question to ask because 13 years is a long time. It's not a week, it's not a month, it's not even 1 year or 5 years, but over a decade, almost a decade and a half, experientially, these Muslims were living Islam, engaging revelation in real time, and were still being in a place where they were being brought to something. But it wasn't being brought to just ritual or practice or postures and prayers and do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs. And if it wasn't just that, then what was happening in those first 13 years? A lot of it was revelation that had the purpose of changing what it was that was going on inside, so that how they saw what was taking place outside of them was seen differently. Stories and parables and lessons of previous prophets, verses that spoke about ethics and values, again and again the iteration of Tawheed. There is one God and only one God, and just that God. There was nothing other than this God. Before him, there was nothing. After him, there is nothing. He is the first, he is the last, our creator, our provider. An akhirah, a belief in an afterlife, that this world is something that does in fact exist, but in proportionality to the next, it's like a drop in the bucket. And all of these things that were being instilled through these verses that were coming down in a 13-year span, before anybody fasted 30 days of Ramadan, before anybody put on 2 white sheets and started to walk in circles around the Kaaba to perform the Hajj in Dhul Hijjah, before there were any of these practices, these people were engaged in a revelatory experience that sought to enhance how it was that they actually saw things, how they made sense of things, how they perceived things. And it wasn't just from a vision of the eye, but as a starting point, a vision that was inward, a heart. And you can create parallels that are not things that you have to reduce when it comes to religion. Why do I have to have a fear of God? Well, it's not like a fear the way you're afraid of spiders or the dark. But the same way you're afraid you're going to lose your job because somebody authoritative will hold you accountable if you do something that doesn't go in the way that they think you should do it, you can parallel the principle to say the divine wants you to do certain things too. And there will be consequences to what you do. You could do it however you want. You're just going to have to explain why it was done that way. When you're in a place where you can think about striving and struggling, some of you are going to stay up till the middle of the night and not sleep for days in order to finish exam papers and finals, to struggle in ways that you have to have that dollar in order to have that house that has that many numbers of rooms and that many cars that can fit in that garage. May Allah always make us from the people who are grateful to Him. But if you can strive for that way in terms of what it is that you can gain in this world, then principally you know that you have capacity to strive towards some objective. And what these people were getting instilled within them for 13 years was that strive and struggle, definitely, but don't limit it to something temporary. Put it into perspective of what is going to be eternal in its existence. May Allah make us people of Jannah. The reading of a mushaf in and of itself is not just about recitations that come from a tongue. When we stand and we read Surah Al-Kahf, it's not just so we engage in ritual from the outward on the day of Jummah. When we get to places where we are just days away, in reality in proportion to, again, what is eternal, just moments away from yet another month of Ramadan. May Allah bless us to reach it and make us from those who take benefit from it fully, because we start readying ourselves for it from now. You know that you are going to stand and listen to a recitation again and again and again like clockwork. But you got to actually read those verses and think within your own socialization around Islam, If the first things you were given were things that were revealed in the last 10 years of revelation, when are you going to start connecting to the things that were in the first 13 years of this thing? That were meant to set a foundation that allowed for me to then determine the steps that I take in this world, not being things that were limited in pursuit of the world, but through a prism of ethics, values, lessons, ideals, theologies, doctrines, beliefs, actually being something that penetrates the hardest and darkest parts of my inside and influences how it is that I see the world around me. We have everybody move up. The brothers can come anywhere there's carpet in front of you. You can follow our volunteers' directions. So we got to fit a lot of people in this room before we fill up the live stream rooms downstairs. So when somebody asks me, you talk about building disciplined communities in a previous Jummah that we just had, and standing not in a place where we are just bodies, but we learn each other's names. Why this is an important thing to understand is because you can only connect at the level of hearts if you carry each other in your hearts. And when you deepen that in terms of now belief and perspective that is shaped by belief, not shaped by just actions, but actions that are shaped by belief. How can you connect on a shared belief if you don't even know what the book says you're supposed to believe in? You can't connect at the level of shared hearts and shared values. You will only connect at the level of shared language and shared race and shared culture and shared class and shared externals, because you're not spending any time actually engaged in stuff that intends to transform the inner part of you and to then shape how it is that you perceive the external. Why do you think about companionship in the way that you do, and what would be an acceptable partner, not just for you, but for your children? Why do you think about money and wealth and affluence and influence in the ways that you do? The things you struggle and strive for, the acquisition of what it is that you put the best young years of your life into. That's a belief system that you're tapping in some capacity. And life is full of paradoxes, and a paradox that we've talked about is rooted in decision making. And when you don't make a choice, you've essentially chosen. The difference is whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously. And as we have aspirations as a community, as we think about what it is that our growth trajectory is, and we outgrow room after room, and we move in directions to occupy spaces that are larger so that we can go out and continue to build more and do more and serve more. We want to aspire to be a community that is made up of people of the Quran, not just its reciters from the tongue, not just people who have memorized it, where there's barakah in this as well. But our prophet was described as a man who was the walking manifestation of this book. He lived its teachings, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the most enlightening conversations I ever had with somebody who took their shahada at a later time in their life. When I was sitting in Europe, I used to go there more often before I got married. Not that my wife doesn't let me go. And one of the gatherings we sat in were just 6 people who had taken their shahada in that local community that gathered together quite often. There's a young girl who came from a Punjabi background who converted to Islam and was telling me her story. And she said to me, it took me 7 years to decide to convert to this beautiful religion. I said, what were you trying to figure out in those 7 years? And she said, I wasn't trying to figure out anything. The theology made sense. and how it then informed practice made sense, the ethics made sense, the spirituality made sense. She said, it took me 7 years to actually find Muslims who demonstrated that they lived by the Quran. And how do you get to that place? There's people who benefit from us not actually reading. It's not you, but there's a lot of other people who benefit when we are willfully engaged in the pursuit of limited acquisition of knowledge. May Allah make us people of knowledge and wisdom. And the invitation is there not to just be somebody who stands and listens, but to engage now in actual reflection. The book was sent for you more than anybody else. You can't gain from it if you don't read it and reflect upon it. 13 years in Mecca, they were not engaged in the practices that we engage in. Where did they pray Jummah together in the 6th year of revelation? Where? Where did they have conversations that reduce gender to just telling women why they are inappropriate because they don't dress a certain way? Verses of hijab did not come in the first 13 years of revelation. What were they building at that time? They were building their inside, because that was what influenced how they saw what was taking place outwardly. If you don't want to be racist anymore, you don't want to be somebody who carries forward on cultural norms that contradict with our religious norms, you don't want to be somebody who's overwhelmed with all kinds of subservience to desires that you know are not only just hurting your family and your friends, but hurting you. You don't like it, what it feels like when people make you feel less than who you are, and they instill within you a mindset that your Islam is a liability and not an asset. You want to walk in the world with a sense of dignity and grace and honor. You don't want to look down at people who are homeless. You don't want to be the type of person that makes excuses as to why you don't give in charity to people who are in need. You want to be somebody who feels joy when there's liberation in a country that has been plagued by conflict for over a decade, and you can't understand how it is that everybody's immediate response is about how a vacuum in leadership is just going to create what we saw in other countries that this thing happened. Let people have their joy. Some of these people didn't see their families for more than 10 or 15 years. If you don't want to see the world like that, what are you doing that enables you to take this beautiful ni'mah of iman and allow for it to be transformative of your inner self? So that that inner self perceives differently what it is that's taking place outwardly. It makes sense and it envisions a reality that embodies hadith, that tell us things like the affair of the believer is unique. When difficulty befalls them, they patiently persevere, and there's good in that. When something good falls upon them, they thank Allah for that, and there's good in that. It's all about perspective. In an Adamic narrative of creation, when Adam alayhi salam is front and center, and Allah Azza wa Jal tells everything to prostrate, everybody does except Iblis. Arrogance, flawed logic, racism, I am of fire, he is of earth, why would I do this? But you also have to understand is that everybody sees it a certain way, and he sees it differently. He's interjecting limited perspective into the world. We are supposed to be a people that have perspective that is both outward and inward, not in just one direction. Because if you only see outwardly, that's a problem. But also if you only see inwardly, that's a problem. It's got to go in both spheres. If there's nothing that you're doing that yields to an understanding of religion in this way, I'm just Muslim because my parents were Muslim. Well, that's why you don't invite people to your house that come from different skin colors than you do. Because you cannot connect at the level of hearts when you're not in a place where you hold in your heart what's necessary to actually share that in common with somebody else. When your engagement of practice is limited to just the do's and don'ts and the mechanics, and it's not even in a way that it's other than a vacuum. It's supposed to be a means to something. What is it a means to? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O people of Iman. It's not talking just to people who are the best, like superstar Muslims in the world, sound in their Iman, strong in their Ihsan. May Allah make us from amongst them. But when you look at a Medanese phase of existence versus a Meccan phase in existence, who are Muslims in Mecca? Everybody is just people who believe in this thing. But now when they get to Medina, there's not the same persecutions. There's not the same trials and tribulations. There's all those people who came from Mecca. There's the Ansar who accepted them and also had a heightened level of Iman. There's people who were just struggling in their day-to-day, and we know that this is something that's happening. Companions coming to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, make zina halal for me. They're struggling. Ya Rasulullah, I drank alcohol. They're struggling. They're trying their best to implement. And then there's a third group who they're outwardly expressing it, but inwardly they don't believe it. And they are still being addressed in these verses. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Which group are you in? Which group am I in? Most of the world walks through the streets of this city and cities around the entire globe, just running on default settings. No consciousness, no mindfulness, no wakefulness. Every single day is the same as the day before. A hallmark characteristic of a person of Iman is one of adaptability and change. It doesn't have to be at levels of grandeur. You don't go from one day not knowing any Quran to the next day memorizing all of it. The expectations cannot be unreasonable. I don't pray 5 times a day, and from tomorrow I'm going to pray tahajjud every night of my life. But growth can be gradual. Steps backward even create a vantage point of what's ahead from a different standpoint. You have a God who we are taught that if you didn't make mistakes, he'd get rid of all of us and replace us with a creation that did, so he'd have a creation to forgive. But steps backwards or steps forwards, those aren't even on the table. We're just stuck. What's transforming you? What is it that influences your perspective? That's what Allah gives us Quran for, so that we actually change how it is that we see the world. If you didn't read it today and you haven't read it in many yesterdays, then let today and this night not fall upon you and depart without you just picking it up and trying to understand what is it telling you. Think about deeply how we get to this place, because many of you in this room have your own children, or you will eventually have children, and may Allah make us those who always honor the rights of our children. It doesn't go just in one direction. It goes in both directions. You can be transformative against norms and practices that are not rooted in our religion, that tell you that just because I'm a parent, I can do whatever I want to my kid. You're going to still stand in front of God one day, and you're going to have to explain, where did that notion come from? But if you read the Quran and you read the Hadith with an understanding that the Sunnah was a manifestation of the Quran, and then you see that the Prophet told his children that he loved them, that when others saw him kiss his grandson and would say that I have this many sons and I don't kiss any of them, and the Prophet would say that there is no mercy for one who has no mercy. And then you ponder upon it and you reflect upon it. You allow for it to not be something that's just uttered from here, but penetrating your inner self and saying that this is the philosophy of life that I want to be moved by and lived by. So that I'm not just a body standing next to another body, but I'm moving in a way where I find replenishment and transformation, and I then lay a foundation rooted in what it is that this text is telling me, because who other than the one who created me is going to give me an insight as to what does it really mean to be the best version of myself. There's a lot of animals in creation that are struggling because humans are not good at being human, really. Not any one of us is going to be held in account for anyone else's actions or decisions, but we're going to be held in account for the decisions that we decided upon. May Allah grant us ease on that day and entrance into His Jannah without any judgment. Why are you going to prostrate in 10 minutes with all of us all together if you don't want that prostration to actually push your inner self to the place of transformation that it's supposed to bring you to? Why? Why are you going to pray your sunnah prayers? Why are you going to fast these fasts? Why are you going to give this charity if you're not open to the consequence that is beneficial, that is yielded through these things? This world does not want us to practice our Islam, and it wants us to reduce it just to a handful of verses that are important, but they're not the only ones. 85 chapters of Quran revealed in a Meccan experience, 29 in a Medanese. That means there's a lot going on before the do's and don'ts came down. What was it, and how do you live by it? A generation that was pushed in all directions, made themselves willfully poor. They weren't all in places of poverty. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha bankrupts herself. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh multiple times bankrupts himself. And they never look back even once with regret. They have an inner self that's strengthened, but they allowed for that experience to be transformative. On this day of Jummah, just ask yourself, why do you see things the way that you see them? The ideals, the values that you profess, not aspirationally, but take a look at the last week of the choices you chose, and through them, gain an insight on what is actually important to you based off of how you have lived your days. And most of us in this room, the things that we deem to be important are coming from systems and structures that have instructed and socialized us, that are established by people who they ridicule and mock our faith. They hate black people. They hate anything that is remotely similar to black people. And whether you admit it or not, it plays a deep role in why it is that you choose your choices. And Allah gave us an alternative that isn't rooted in, I got to sit down 6 hours a day and read this thing and study it in the middle of a desert. We have more access to information than any generation that came before us. We have willfully became a population that is Muslim in name, but not Muslim in reality. What should a person of Quran be like? Would a person of Quran be somebody who mistreats someone? Would a person of Quran be somebody who mocks and ridicules someone? Would a person of Quran be somebody who disrespects their elders, who abuses their youngsters, who mocks their spouse? Could you be a person of Quran and be somebody who is racist, bigoted, hateful? But somebody who actually lives that book, you don't even have to theorize. Your Prophet ﷺ was the walking manifestation of it. Smiled at those that he knew and did not know, encouraged you and I to greet those that we know and not know, made time in the busyness of his world as he is going through all kinds of difficulty, an orphan multiple times over before the time he's even 8 years of age, living in a state of poverty, responsible for every heart that is going to come until the end of time, and still goes and asks a little boy whose pet bird died if he's doing okay. A man who, when blood is shed from his face at the Battle of Uhud, he jumps to catch the drops of blood before they hit the dirt. And when the companions ask, why are you doing this? He says that those people who caused these injuries to him, they would not be able to handle what would happen to them if this blood hit that earth. Allahumma gfirli qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. That, oh Allah, forgive my qawm, he says in this moment, for indeed they do not understand. A man who's so gentle and so compassionate that when a kitten falls asleep on the sleeve of his shirt, rather than disrupting its slumber, he cuts the sleeve off of his clothes. That's somebody who manifests Quran. Why would you not want to be transformed by this text and its teachings? Don't wait till the nights of Ramadan to have somebody else read it to you. If you can't read Arabic, pick it up now, a translation, and allow for yourself to go in with no assumptions, so you just let it be something that really allows for you to engage it. But we have an aspiration that we become a community of Quran, that we become a people of Quran. But we cannot have that if as individuals, we don't start to carry it in the way it's intended in our hearts. 13 years of Mecca. Don't let yourself only be exposed to what came down in Medina, and love your inner self enough that you want for yourself to see and experience this worldly existence differently. And then all you gotta do is pick up the book and read it. And inshallah ta'ala, it will impact us in a beneficial way, the way our Creator intended for it to do so. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. Don't let shaitan get into your heads. You got to read one verse before you could read one page. You're not in competition with anybody else. You're just trying to be a person today that is not afraid to meet the person you can become tomorrow. Ask yourself on this day of Jummah, what does success look like for you? Not in a worldly sense, but in an otherworldly sense. Then when you are standing in front of the divine, what will that standing look like? What influences the choices I'm making now? And how do I bring some consciousness into it? I promise you, there's not anything that our text calls us to that is not about anything other than increasing benefit and reducing detriment. It's just about making things good and getting rid of as much wrong as we can. You just have to want that for yourself, and to allow for your belief system to be shaped by this consciously, rather than the things that have unconsciously been permeating and colonizing our minds for too long. The world needs Muslims who actually believe in Islam. And that can be you before anybody else. Allow for yourself to want that and then take the steps necessary to get to that place. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وفي الآخرين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. We begin this supplication in your name, Ya Allah, and beseech you to send your choicest salutations upon your most beloved, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. We ask that you shower your infinite mercy upon this gathering, granting each and every one who is present herein and our loved ones only the best in this world and the best in the next. We ask, Ya Allah, that if all of us are meant to be together only at this time, at this place, whether we are young or old, male or female, regardless of our race, our ethnicity, our social class, our country of origin, our cultural heritage, whether we are Muslim or come from a different walk of life, Ya Rabbi, if our individual hearts are meant to be in the presence of all of their hearts that are gathered here, only at this time, at this place, then gather us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. Increase us, Ya Allah, in all that is good. Increase us in courage, compassion, and confidence. Protect us from affliction, anxiety, and anguish. Remove from our hearts any feelings of bitterness, jealousy, animosity, or envy towards any of your creation. Grant us hearts that are filled with understanding and hope, hearts that are drawn towards things of true goodness and beauty, hearts that find themselves deep in your remembrance, for indeed in your remembrance do hearts find rest. Make us, Ya Allah, from amongst those who take benefit from your Quran. Grant us the tawfiq to understand its meanings, both apparent and hidden. Allow for us to be willing to be transformed by its teachings. And in all of our decisions, our choices, our actions, let us find the presence of the wisdoms that this book was gifted to us by you for nothing less than other than our benefit. Remove from us the fears and anxieties that get in the way from us turning to it for guidance. And allow for us to always be reminders of the mercy, the love, the compassion that it teaches us that are essential attributes of you, Ya Rabb. Help us, Ya Allah, to build a deeper connection with it. And remove from us anything that distracts us from doing so. Let us be people, Ya Allah, who through the teachings of your book serve as reminders that hope, mercy, love, and compassion do in fact exist. A special dua, Ya Allah, for our students who are entering into their final exam periods. Ease for them their stresses and anxieties, strengthen their minds and their hearts, and grant them tawfiq in these tests and every test that they might face in this world, Ya Allah, giving them more success on every tomorrow they see, and the ultimate success when they stand in front of you on that day, giving them entrance into Jannah without any judgment. And for all those, Ya Allah, who are going through any difficulty or hardship, we ask that you descend upon them ease and peace. Make us a community that stands together, side by side, inwardly and outwardly, so that we can continue to do the things which others say cannot be done. Protect us always from hearts that are not humble, tongues that are not wise, and eyes that have forgotten how to cry. Forgive us for our shortcomings and guide and bless us all. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وأقم الصلاة.